Welcome, everyone. Hi, my name is Angela Love-Zaranka with Lactation Education Resources. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have my fellow co-speaker here, facilitator, Sekeita.
Hello, everyone. Sekeita Lewis-Johnson here, joining Angela, also representing Lactation Education Resources. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from.
So thanks everybody for joining us. Just a little bit about Sekeita and myself. I will introduce myself. I've been with LER for several years. I have been a peer-to-peer supporter working in the community for over 30 years. That was hard to say. And I have been board certified for over 20 years. So I have experience working in the community as well as working in a hospital setting. So in a variety of different settings. What about you, Sekeita?
Well, I bring you, let's see where I start off at. I start off from my nursing career as a maternal child nurse over 20 years, but I've been a lactation consultant for about 13 years now. And I also work for LER as the accredited provider program director. And I'm one of the instructors. And I still do consulting. I do telehealth. I do in-home visits. And I've also worked in the hospital setting and in my community. I think
Excellent.
that sums it up.
That's good. That's wonderful. Thank you. So it really doesn't matter though about Sekeita and myself from a perspective of becoming an IBCLC. It really depends upon you and your journey. And that's exactly what we'd like to address today. If you are joining us, it means that you want to support breastfeeding and chest feeding families and those providing human milk for their baby. And so we're going to tell you how you can do this. If you're watching this on YouTube, please post your questions in the comments below. And you can also contact our amazing customer support team at support@lactationtraining.com. So let's dive in and take a closer look at what a lactation consultant is and how you can follow your passion and become one. If you do decide to become an IBCLC, you'll join more than 32,000 IBCLCs in over 122 countries and territories. Credentialing as a lactation consultant is offered by the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners. Take a look at their website, iblce.org. They have different regional offices depending on where in the world you reside or work. Review the requirements and the pathways to become eligible to take the IBLCE certification exam. What do you need to know? The detailed content outline or the exam blueprint is based on a survey of IBCLCs in various practice settings around the globe. The outline covers all of the topic areas and the chronological stages an IBCLC needs to know in their work. LER courses cover the entire detailed content outline, and our courses are approved by LARC. That's the Lactation Education Accreditation and Approval Review Committee, which is why I say LARC, it's a little faster. That's the organization that evaluates and approves lactation consultants training courses. So today, there are a couple of questions to start off with, and these are questions to ask yourself. Sekeita, what are those questions?
All right, thanks, Angela. So before we dive in, while we're speaking, both Angela and myself, one of the things I want you to keep in mind and at the forefront is these couple of questions. It may be helpful to write them down. So the first question being, do I have the skills necessary to become an IBCLC? We're going to talk about those skills today because I think when we hear the word skills, we automatically jump to this hands-on, task-oriented way of being. But I'm talking about a whole heap of other things. So it's do I have the skills? And if not, where can I acquire these skills? That's the second part. So just be cognizant of these questions, and hopefully we're going to help you make sense of it all. And don't worry if it doesn't make sense the first time. Sometimes people need to hear this a couple times before they're like, I get it. And also this will be recorded. So, all right, next slide, please. So what makes an IBCLC? I talked about skills, right? but competency. Competency is critical, and it's the core of what we do. It is necessary to make sure that you provide adequate and appropriate lactation support. Competency means that you have the ability, the knowledge, and the skills to do it successfully. So in a nutshell, we often talk about novice to expert. Novice meaning, yes, I have the foundational knowledge and I have some skills, but no, I haven't been there, done that. I don't have as much experience. So to speak, so to speak, as an expert in the field, so at the end of your training, what Angela and I are hoping is that you'll be confident that you are doing no harm and that you'll know that's why competency is important. Next slide, please. Culturally appropriate and credible. Let's really unpack what culturally appropriate means. If you've worked in healthcare or been around anyone or in any other business sector, you may have heard the word culturally competent. That word that I just spoke about, competency, right? Competency. Think about competency. Can you ever become competent in someone else's culture? So when we say culturally appropriate, that's a way of making this notion of culturally competent a little bit more clear. And as we know, language and how language is used is so important these days. So we want to make sure we are using terms that make sense. So culturally appropriate is more fitting for what we do as lactation consultants. And being culturally appropriate starts with cultural humility. And cultural humility is defined as this lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another person's culture, but starts with an examination of their own beliefs and cultural identities. And that definition can be found from the National Institute of Health. And that's just one definition of cultural humility. But it's important to remember it is a lifelong process. So when we're talking about cultural humility, some people like to say things like, well, it's not in their culture to do X, Y, and Z. We know we want to avoid saying that, really, because we also know within cultures, there are subcultures. So the first part of cultural humility is not feeding into stereotypes, not making assumptions about what someone will and won't do based on their culture, because you really don't know unless you've been told by that particular person that that's not appropriate. So culturally appropriate care is that individual care, but it also starts with us first examining ourselves. Credibility. Are you a credible resource? When you're asked something and you don't know the answer, how do you respond? Do you try to just off the whim say, okay, I'll just answer it to whatever I feel like it, or based on my own lived experience? I'm asking that question because it's especially as it relates to breastfeeding and chest feeding, everyone wants to tell you their story. Oh, it didn't hurt. Oh, it hurt really bad. Oh, it's not that bad, right? You don't want to not just only rely on your own experience. You really want to value and rely on the evidence. So being a credible resource means you're giving out information, A, that coincides with the best evidence, and B, you really know what you're talking about. So do you know what the evidence says? And if you don't, do you know where to go find it? It's important to know we're not walking dictionaries, we're walking computers. It's impossible to know everything. So showing credibility is really all about, okay, I know enough to say, I really don't know that, but let me get back to you because I got a resource I can dig into. So credibility is everything. And one of the things that happens if you as an individual lose credibility as a lactation consultant or lactation supporter, that means that the most of us will lose credibility. And people will begin to not trust that we can really be helpful with helping them achieve their goals. Next slide, please. So a couple of other things we do as IBCLCs is we advise on policy. We actually help create policies. And that's important to know because from a standpoint of talking about clinical care, remember I said, do you have the skills necessary? So what if you have strong skills in policy? I'm like, yay, yes, we need you, we need you, we need you. Because as I said before, language is important. The language and policies matter. And so if you are a policy person and that's your thing, you already have a piece of it. But also being able to sit at the table and know how policies are created. So maybe it's not your strong suit, but you really want to know how policies are created and how they impact us. And that then informs our advocacy. That informs a big, big, big part of what we do, who we are. And a person that's an advocate is simply a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. So even if you're not a policy advisor, so to speak, you can be that person at the table listening to how policies are created. Next slide, please. Problem solver and researcher. Problem solvers, this is about 90% of what we do as lactation supporters, because each family have their own components and their own set of subjective world, I guess, that comes along with whatever their issue they're having. And really, when we're called for support, it is usually to help someone, usually solve a problem or an issue. So sometimes we like to get into a one size fits all, and just know that one size never fits all. And we really need to be problem solving toward more individualization of that particular family and what concerns they're sharing. Along with being a problem solver, as I said before, you have to go back to, I don't know this, but where can I get the answer? And that's where research comes in. There's two ways to be a researcher here. You can be a person who carries out academic or scientific research, and we need that too in the profession, we do. We have those in this profession. We have lots of researchers. Or you can be that person whose job involves discovering or verifying information. And that is all of us. Let's remember, I said, we're not walking around with everything in our head. We have tools that we can use. And we also have colleagues that we build relationships with. And so I know how to research and get this correct answer to help effectively solve the problem is a great start, and not going off of your own whim or our own whim, because I'm a lactation support provider as well. Next slide, please. High-level lactation and skilled lactation care. Those go hand in hand. And when we talk about high-level lactation care, I'm going to give you just an example of basic breastfeeding care, which is assisting with latch and positioning, and when the parent and infant are both well and there are no other issues, it's almost like that person is just saying, I need just a little bit of assistance. When we talk about high level, I am going to use an example of someone in an ICU who was lactating prior to going to the intensive care unit, and now they're intubated with a breathing tube. Are you able to deliver that type of care? Are you able to look at their medications and say, whoa, okay, these medications mean this or don't really mean anything? Are you able to say, well, this person is intubated and may have a brain injury. How does that brain injury impact lactation? Are you able to make the connection? So when you're doing your training, sometimes it's so much and you're like, oh, why do I need to know about the brain? Just know you need to know about the brain, because it is the level of care that sets IBCLCs apart, that can make that enables you to make clinical decisions that is appropriate for that level of care. And so we talk about acuity, which is the level of care, and all of those things are important to high-level lactation support. I said skills go hand in hand, and I'm going to tell you right off, I started with skills. Skills is necessary. You'll probably hear me say skills a few more times. I'm going to tell, and I just told you right off, probably one of the worst, like somebody that's intubated. But the expectation is that you're not going into whatever clinical experience you have thinking, I've seen it all. Yeah, you just do this. However, you want to build up on your skills, and you want to build up on your skills and build up on your skills in conjunction with knowing enough to say, well, that's not in my knowledge set, but let me figure it out. Your skills will develop into expert mode if you consider that model. Essential and timely. One of the things that we found out during this pandemic is that essential is like a new buzzword. But we also found out that yes, lactation consultants are essential because babies still need to eat, people are still having children, especially during this pandemic, and promoting and protecting the ability to provide human milk is critically important, not just from the bonding and the family, but also from a public health and prevention standpoint. So yes, we are essential, and it is important that we show up when they need us, that we are timely, that we can't say to folks, we're in a pandemic now, so I don't know when it's going to be over, you're on your own. No, we are frontline workers. And so I just want to make that really clear that yes, we talk a lot about telehealth, we really do. We talk a lot about providing other means of care, such as support group and social media, but I'm going to tell you that those methods and telehealth is not the end all to be all. We can miss things. Telehealth, it prohibits our ability to use our other senses. During this pandemic, I can recall when where a baby hadn't been to see the pediatrician, and the parent had been calling for support. And when I say support, I mean lactation support. And she said, I need in-home lactation support. Well, it turns out that the baby couldn't effectively feed from her breast because the baby couldn't even effectively feed from a bottle. So there were some tone issues the baby had. So me, as the person, as the advocate coming in, I'm like, let me see. No, this baby needs to be as soon as possible. And when you become, remember I talked about the community piece and trusted in the community. When you're a person that says this baby needs to be seen, if you're a trusted member, those care providers are like, okay, let's make this happen. So that's what I mean about being timely. We are essential, and it is really prudent and our duty to show up so that we minimize harms caused to families, that we are accessible, because that's what becoming an IBCLC is all about. It is being able to provide accessible care at the time that it's needed. Collaborative care partner. I love this phrase so much because what it assumes is that you are collaborating with your client. You are not the center. You are not the decision maker. You are collaborating. Remember that it's the families and their partners, their goals, their fears, it's their barriers that takes precedence over your goals for them. So I'm not saying that to say that, you know what, you don't make the difference, because we do. But sometimes we walk in with these recommendations, exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months. We know those things, right? And it's important that we still honor those and we still talk about them. However, we have to understand that we are collaborating in partnership, in agreement, that when someone seeks our care, that we make sure that we approach it in that manner that we don't overstep some boundaries, that we are not meant to overstep. And that's another way to become trusted is adhering to those boundaries. In all honesty, the way you become trusted is to do no harm, to be reliable, and to be in the phase that you can say, I see you as a person. I see that we're in this together. I'm not higher than you. We're collaborating to do what's best for you. And that's how you become trusted. So when you go into certain clinical relationships and you take on this, you assume this hierarchy, like, yep, I'm the expert. I'm the IBCLC. I know all about this. I've been teaching breastfeeding and chest feeding for 15, 20 years. I'm going to tell you how this should work. You're gonna trust me. You're gonna do fine, no doubt. When you go in like that, or when you go in and you touch someone without permission. They said they wanted assistance with latch, and you're like, let me tell them what type of assistance they're looking for. Before you go in with those types of behaviors, ways of being, thoughts, think about, is that a collaborative relationship? Are you acting in a collaborative manner? Because if you're not, that's a way to kill trust. So I've talked about culture, I've talked about collaboration, I've talked about care, the type of care you deliver, how communication works, and truly the person is at the center of all of those. The Institute of Medicine defines patient-centered care as providing care that is respectful of and responsive to individual patient preferences, needs, and values, and ensuring that patient values guide all clinical decision making. So patient-centered care has also become a buzzword, really and truly. Don't let it become a buzzword for you. Really practice what this model looks like, and then build your trust with your community, not just your client, and build trust with other clinicians that work around you. Next slide, please. So Angela's getting ready to talk about the pathways. I'm going to advise you put your seatbelts on. My part was just the sappy part, the part that says what we do, and I love that part. But Angela will speak about the pathways. While she is speaking, some things you want to consider before starting this journey. You want to consider your current commitments, job, family, school. You also want to look at what does lactation support look like in your area? What is the market? Are IBCLCs in demand? Are there any other IBCLCs that can provide mentorship for you? What are the requirements? And if you're in an area where you're going to be going into private practice, what does that look like realistically for you in your area? And ways to do that is to become familiar with any local coalitions or any people that are doing this work in your community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Angela. There you go, Angela.
Thanks, Sekeita. All right, you're right. We are going to get through all the steps here, and we are going to show you how to become an IBCLC. And keeping Sekeita's questions in mind is really going to be it's really going to help you to inform your decision as far as the best route for you. So the roadmap to IBCLC looks like this. It can feel a bit complicated, but I'm going to break it down and give you this nice little roadmap. So the first thing you need to do is choose a pathway. Now we're going to come back to that in just a minute. Each pathway has 3 components. The first one is education. The second one is clinical hours. And the third one is getting ready for the exam or exam prep. So the first component, health sciences education. So it's typical education for a healthcare provider. There are 8 post-secondary or university level courses and 6 general education subjects. You can find a full list of each of the 14 subjects on the IBLCE website. You can search for it, or you can find the link in the resource document. You should be able to find the handout right below this video. So the 8 university level courses, and you don't need to write these down, are biology, anatomy, physiology, infant and child growth and development, introduction to clinical research, nutrition, psychology or counseling skills or communication skills, and finally sociology or cultural sensitivity or cultural anthropology. They can be online or in person as long as the institution is accredited to provide the learning. If you look at these courses during your, if you've taken any of these courses during your college career, they count, even if it was 20 years prior. The 6 general education subjects are medical documentation, medical terminology, occupational safety and security for health professionals, professional ethics for health professionals, universal safety precautions and infection control, and basic life support. So 5 of the 6 general ed courses can be taken through LER. The only one you'll need to search for is basic life support. In many countries, there is an in-person skills check for this training, but I've heard some organizations providing the training completely online, one of the silver linings of the COVID-19 pandemic. Check your local resources. In the resources, there is a link to the Health Sciences Education Guide. The guide provides general descriptions for the typical courses in the subject area. Now, why are these descriptions so general? It's because IBCLC is international. So the names that they use in that document to describe the courses may not exactly fit the description of the courses at your accredited educational institution. That's okay. IBCLC uses those broad terms with the understanding that there is no universal description for what a course in, say, clinical research will cover. Now, why are these 14 courses required? The reason why is because the IBCLC is a standalone credential, meaning you don't need to have another certification or degree or license to practice as an IBCLC. Once you pass the exam, you will be an allied healthcare professional. The courses will help you prepare your career as well as to help you pass the IBCLC exam. So the second thing is the lactation-specific education. This is where LER has you covered. The education should be comprehensive and cover the IBCLC detailed content outline. So IBCLC requires at least 90 hours of lactation-specific education and 5 hours on communication skills. Our 5-hour course is specific to lactation and breastfeeding care, and it can help you in your practice as a lactation consultant. The third component is lactation-specific clinical experience. This can include in-person consultations, telephone consultations, or online breastfeeding and lactation care that supports breastfeeding families. It also includes lactation assistance to pregnant and breastfeeding or chest feeding clients and lactation education to families and or professionals. These hours are to be obtained in the 5 years immediately prior to applying for the exam. How many do you need? Well, that depends on which pathway you choose. So the amount of clinical experience required to sit the exam depends on this pathway. So the hours, again, need to be accrued in the 5 years prior to applying for this exam. And so this quick overview will help. So pathway 1 is for healthcare professionals and those who provide breastfeeding support through an IBCLC recognized breastfeeding support counselor organization. Healthcare professionals include physicians, nurses, midwives, dietitians, physical therapists or physiotherapists, speech pathologists, and others. Breastfeeding support counselors include those accredited through organizations such as LER, La Leche League International, or the Australian Breastfeeding Association. As of this presentation, there are over 40 organizations that have applied to IBCLC and been approved. As of July of 2021, LER is included as a breastfeeding support organization. You can find the updated list on the IBCLC website. So Pathway 2 applicants must complete a comprehensive academic program in human lactation and breastfeeding through an accredited university program. Their education has both didactic and clinical components, and they require 300 clinical supervised hours working with breastfeeding families. Pathway 3 is a structured mentorship program between an IBCLC and the applicant. The IBCLC or IBCLCs must be in good standing with IBLCE. Those who choose this pathway must have their program pre-approved by IBLCE prior to beginning their clinical hours. And I understand that this is happening relatively quickly, usually within a few weeks. Now, just a quick note, for those of you who have breastfed or chest fed or provided human milk for your child, the hours you spent nursing and pumping and helping your friends does not count towards taking the exam. So now 500 or 1,000 hours may seem like a lot, but there's a good reason why. Each candidate needs to have enough clinical experience so they can provide competent care as an IBCLC. If it's any consolation, the number of clinical hours was a lot more. I've known IBCLCs who needed anywhere from 2,500 to 8,000 clinical hours in order to sit the IBLCE exam. So candidates who are applying for the IBLCE exam through Pathway 1 need at least 1,000 clinical hours. For the candidate who's also a healthcare provider, the hours can be done in a hospital, birth center, clinic, lactation care practice, or a primary care practitioner's office, or an independent practice as a licensed or registered healthcare professional in a non-healthcare setting. You may be asking yourself, who is a healthcare provider according to IBLCE? Go to our resource page and you can find the link to the IBLCE website. For breastfeeding support counselors from an IBLCE recognized organization, their hours can be earned in person or online. The location and type of support depends on the criteria provided by the recognized organization. As of January 1st of 2022, the hours will be counted on an hour-by-hour basis. So 2 important points about these clinical hours. It's important for you to document your hours as you accrue them. Be very detailed in case IBLCE chooses to audit your application to take the exam. They may want to see documentation such as a spreadsheet or other document where you counted your hours. And the 1,000 hours do not need to be directly supervised. Now, Pathway 3 requires 500 hours of clinical experience, and this experience must be directly supervised by a board-certified lactation consultant or an IBCLC in good standing. It's best done in a busy practice setting where you can work with many breastfeeding, chest-feeding people, and those providing human milk for their babies, such as a hospital or clinic setting. There's an application for this pathway, as I mentioned before, so do plan it out and submit it in advance before you start your program. Now, the 500 hours are those where you're actually working with families. Observation hours don't count. Clinical experience is going to be graduated. That is, it's going to start with observation, and then you're going to do a few tasks under supervision, then completing tasks independently with the IBCLC close by to ask questions and discuss the situations. Now, I recently had a conversation with Amy Black, who's our clinical internship director. And we agree that most people spend about 75 hours in orientation before you and the IBCLC feel comfortable having you work more independently and begin to accrue the 500 hours. So take that into account as you're planning. Now take a look around in your community to see if you can find a willing internship site or mentors. You may need to reach out to many people to find one with the time, experience, and capacity to agree to be your mentor. It's important to find a good fit. Talk with others who've been through Pathway 3 to find successful strategies with finding a good mentor. If you're interested in this pathway, do go to the website and download the Pathway 3 Plan Guide. They do outline the steps in a relatively comprehensive manner. Now, one thing that some people will do is they'll start their observation hours while IBLCE is actually approving their application. So LER, we do have many internship program sites around the United States. You can reach out to our internship director to find out more information. So now this pathway does have an extra step or two, and some people will ask, well, gee, is it worth it? Well, IBLCE actually reports that students who come through Pathway 3 score better on the exam than any other pathway. I think it's that mentorship piece that's the key component. Learning from an experienced clinician is well worth the extra effort involved at the beginning of this pathway. So a lot of people are asking whether or not they can accrue clinical hours via telehealth during the pandemic. And the quick answer is yes. The longer answer, I'm going to paraphrase from the IBLCE documents. In part, they say, during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, IBLCE published specific guidance about attaining clinical hours when face-to-face interactions were curtailed to reduce the spread of COVID-19. The documents are dated 17 April and 20 October of 2020. The guidance provides information on how, quote, clinical eligibility requirements could be met by leveraging technology. IBLCE will allow the use of technology if certain parameters are met and are allowed by your practice setting and by the IBCLC guiding practice documents such as the scope of practice, the code of professional conduct, and the clinical competencies for the practice of an IBCLC. The key provisions include attention to privacy, security, assessment, demonstration and evaluation of relevant techniques, provision of evidence-based information to clients, as well as appropriate collaboration or referral to other healthcare providers. Particularly emphasized is the principle 3.2 of the Code of Professional Conduct, which requires advance written consent from the breastfeeding parent prior to photographing, recording, or taping audio or video that parent or the child. Another important point about the use of technology for Pathway 3 interns is that there should be observation using technology with two-way synchronous audio and visual components. The focus is on the mentor, providing the mentoring and guidance to the applicant. And Candidate 3 internship mentorship programs may earn 100% of the minimum of 500 hours of the directly supervised clinical care through the technology platforms. Now, this guidance has been extended until 30 September of 2022. So do read all of these IBLCE documents, which are listed in the interim guidance, and the link to the guidance is in the handout. Okay, at LER, there are two ways to gather your lactation-specific education. One is the Lactation Consultant Training Program, or LCTP, which is the usual 95 hours front to back. The other is Core or Bridge. They are designed to meet your educational needs depending on your background and previous lactation training. First, we have a comprehensive course called the Lactation Consultant Training Program, and it is a 95-hour course which is eligible for CERPs, CME, nursing contact hours, and CEs from ACNM, the American College of Nurse Midwives. It is intended for those who do not have any lactation education and know they want to become an IBCLC. As mentioned before, it covers all the topics on the IBLCE detailed content outline. Now, who are the instructors? Well, we have 35 of the most knowledgeable, experienced clinicians who are practicing lactation consultants, researchers, and authors who teach in our courses, including me and Sekeita. Our classes are economical. You can view them on a variety of devices, such as your computer, tablet, or phone. They're optimized for a computer, but they can be reviewed later when you're on the go. We've been educating people in person and online since 1990. We update our course information with the latest peer review evidence on a regular schedule, but we'll update sooner as new evidence emerges. Have a question for an instructor or want to discuss a concept with your fellow students? There are several ways to connect and get the answers you need. We have a very active Facebook group for those who are in the 95-hour course, Core or Bridge, or our exam review course, where our students can meet and support each other along the way. There are people who are IBCLCs in the group who can also support your journey. Upon the completion of the 95-hour course, you're eligible to take the Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. The exam is included in the price. Once you pass, you are a certified breastfeeding specialist. This is to recognize the level of education you have obtained. With this certification, you can begin to collect your clinical hours towards the IBCLC exam. Now, the lactation consultant training program is that full 95 hours, but if you're unsure where to start or you already have some lactation specific education, then we have our core and bridge programs to meet your needs. Now, they have the same advantage as the LCTP course. Our initial course is called Core because it will provide you with the core lactation education you need to understand what it means to begin supporting the normal course of breastfeeding. It's over 52 hours of online education. It covers the basics such as anatomy and physiology, infant growth and development, supporting the preterm baby, medications and breastfeeding, and many more. At the end of the course is the Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. The Bridge course is ideal for people who have the basic lactation education components and need an additional 45 hours to qualify for the IBCLC exam. Topics in our Bridge course include legal and ethical concerns for the lactation consultant, infant feeding and disasters, breastfeeding the infant with medical challenges, case studies, and clinical skills videos. Well, if you're not sure where to start, if you're new to the profession, I would suggest the core course. Get your feet wet and see if becoming an IBCLC fuels your passion. And I'm very excited to announce for the first time today that we have our 95-hour course, as well as the core and bridge courses available in Spanish. Capacitación en Lactancia is our new website, which provides the same high quality education which you have come to find on LER. All of it is in Spanish. Our team is here to help you now and in the future. We have tech support, which is open 7 days a week. You can get your questions answered about content by the experts actually in the field. And we have ongoing support for the next steps in your career. Last week, for example, someone reached out to me and they had a question about their own practice. I made the connection with the instructor for that course, and they were able to get their question answered quickly. There was another student who had a question about creating a policy at their hospital, and we found the appropriate instructor to answer that question and provide additional resources. Several members of our customer support staff include IBCLCs. They get it. They know the journey, and we're all here to support you. Thank you very much for your time today and for listening in. I will take a look at the questions and see what we can answer during the course of the webinar. Sekeita, have you seen any questions in the questions box?
There have been lots of questions, but our customer service team rock. I mean, they've been really, really handling the questions. Yeah, there was a couple comments. Someone said compassion and empathy, and I believe that was when I was talking about some of the characteristics that are essential, and I agree. Those are also essential. That list, it was not all encompassing at all. There are probably lots of adjectives that would describe lots of great clinicians out here doing this work. But yes, thank you. Thank you for chiming in, and thank you for putting that in the chat.
It's true. Okay, I see here there is a question. Someone asked that they are a CBS, they're a certified breastfeeding specialist, and they want to know how to document their hours. So indeed, whatever is most convenient for you, if it's a spreadsheet, if it is old school pencil and paper, if you have an app which can track your hours, that's great. IBCLC does have something on their website which can help you to track those hours, but I believe that's more for people who are working as healthcare professionals and who are only using a small percentage of their time actually working with families. And so do take a look around and see what sort of system might work best for you. The goal is really to make sure that you can document those hours in a way which is convenient for you. And you don't need to be so detailed. In other words, you don't necessarily need the person's name, but just sort of a general, and the reason why has to do is because that's protected health information with regards to privacy laws around the world. And so you want to make sure that you're protecting that valuable information, that privacy information, and you want to, though, ensure that you're able to say that you supported this family, let's say on the 19th of November, supported a family who needed help with latch and positioning. Great. And then document the number of hours that you actually spent with that family.
Angela,
Okay.
there's a question. How do you log 1,000 hours?
In what way? You mean, how do you actually get all those hours, or?
It says, how do you log? I hope I'm reading this right. Well, I read it right, but I think it's hard to really like, I really log them. Yes, you really log. You really log and you write down and you put down your clinical, the time you spent in whatever clinical situation or assisting with lactation. That is the actual log that you keep account of.
And I think it's easier as well. Like, for example, it's really helpful to log those 1,000 hours if you're spending significant chunks of time actually supporting families and or teaching and or running a support group. And so, let's say that on Saturdays from, 10 until 3, you're specifically working only supporting those families. Well, then you can log all of that time. And you may want to make a few notes to yourself as to, taught a prenatal breastfeeding class for this amount of time, taught a returning to work class for this amount of time, and then was available for support group for this amount of time. And so I think if you can be that granular, I think that will be one way to help to log those hours.
Angela, I want to jump in. There's a question where there's a statement and a question, and it says, as a NICU nurse, I've accrued many of my clinical hours before starting the LER lactation specific education course, which I am now doing. Do I have to wait until I complete the LER before accruing the clinical hours? So you can accrue your clinical hours, but I want to be clear because sometimes as nurses, and I'm going to say this as a nurse, and so I don't mean any offense by it at all, but you have to be clear on if your hours as a nurse was spent doing lactation support. What percent of those hours? There's this thought process sometimes that because I'm a nurse and look, trust me, before becoming an IBCLC, I started off in maternal child. Let me just put it that way. And I actually had to get my hours, and it made me a better clinician. And when I say hours, that meant that I spent time following 5 different lactation consultants, trying to figure out best approach, trying to figure out different clinical scenarios, building my skills. And so I want to be clear that you can get some of your clinical hours as a nurse. However, those hours that you're counting should really be hours that are only geared toward lactation support with your families. And so I hope that helps anyone who has a question about that.
Well, and I also want to point something out. Yes, you can begin to accrue those hours before you do any lactation training. However, you have to take a look at the information which you have. In other words, if you gather this information from your studies as a dietitian or a physiotherapist, how much education did you actually get for lactation? Let's say, for example, that in your country, it's everyone knows that in order to make more milk, that you have to take a warm shower on your back, but then you turn and bring cold water to your chest before you nurse the baby, right? And everybody knows that, and that's the fact. You see, but then when you actually get into your studies, you realize, wait a minute, where did that come from? Wait a second here. And then, so in other words, if you don't find that recommendation in your LER studies, which I don't think we have that, then you've been sort of reiterating information and reinforcing information which doesn't have any evidence behind it. And so that's the reason why it's helpful to take that lactation specific education first.
Yeah. There's a question that says, as IBCLCs, do you feel it more beneficial for pathway 3ers to take health science classes first or the lactation education program first? Well, me and Angela, sometimes we agree on certain things, sometimes we go different routes. So I'm going to give you my take on this. When you're taking the lactation education program, sometimes you come across medical terminology, sometimes you come across things that happen and words that happen or science or pathology that happens. And it's important to have like foundational knowledge. So the health science classes, I always figure is setting the foundation so that your lactation education makes a little bit more sense. Now, that's not to say you have to do it that way. I'm just saying that it makes a little bit more sense to you when you have some foundational knowledge. Angela, what are your thoughts?
Well, and I did it differently. And the reason why is because I work exclusively as an IBCLC. And so I actually started out in peer support and in community support first before taking the additional requirements. And therefore, I did not have that background. I had, some of these from college, from my college studies, but I didn't have all of them. And so indeed, there were times, especially working in a hospital, because I worked in a hospital for many years, working in a hospital, sometimes, I had to take a pause and go, okay, wait a minute, what? I had to stop myself and actually, do my own research and do my own homework. So in other words, I had to play catch up later. And so taking those courses, it does help. I agree with you, Sekeita. It does help when you're actually doing your lactation studies for sure.
Yeah. There's another question about,
okay.
I'm having trouble finding places that will allow clinical hours. Any suggestions? Thanks.
Well, it depends. I will say that with the COVID-19 pandemic, it has been challenging to find those clinical hours. And the reason why is because certain clinics as well as hospitals, they have limitations on the number of people that can actually be in that clinic setting and or in the hospital. And so I think it's important what Sekeita said earlier about relationship building. I think it's important to build those relationships and show the facility where you would like to do your internship how you can support their work. In other words, if you're able to be there and to work there, then I think that is something which they may find very helpful. And you can sort of show the value that you would bring to the table by being able to offer possibly classes and or a support group for those families. And so, in other words, showing them that it can sort of be a win-win situation may help you in order to get your foot in the door and to find the opportunity to provide those hours or to attain those hours.
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about this, about finding out who's in your community, who's providing support. Sometimes you can build, you can seek out mentorship. You can seek out ways to be able to accompany a lactation consultant on some visits. And there are some areas who have that model. I can honestly say that I started that with a different organization, but one of the things that happen is the vetting and the trusting, and sometimes, folks don't get that this is a thing built on integrity. We're walking into people's homes. And so when you're building relationships, I think it's important to build that relationship first before yeah, I'm only building this relationship so I can follow you and get these hours, right? When I say relationship, I mean building a trusting relationship. Therefore, a person would be like, yeah, come on, you can tag along, or you can join this telehealth, and those sorts of. So that means that getting in circles. If you have a local coalition of folks that meet about lactation, join that coalition. Start to cultivate those relationships, and then you'll have a better sense of what the landscape looks like around you.
Very true. Very good. There's a question further back which says, for support counseling, how do we calculate our time? Is it just the time we spend with the individual family, or does research time count as well? So yes, it only includes the time that you actually spend with the individual family and or doing some sort of education or support in a group setting. So the research that you need to do in order to get yourself up to speed is not counted in those hours. Okay, a lot of wonderful questions here. Let me just scroll up a little bit. So yes, the CBS exam is included. Someone is taking our coursework in 5 course bundles, and is the CBS exam still included? Yes, it is. And you would just need to reach out to customer support when that time comes. Are CERPs required for all healthcare paths or just for recognized healthcare professionals in Pathway 1? And so for initial certification, IBCLC does not specify that it has to be CERPs, but you have to show proof that you received all 95 of your hours. And someone is asking, does research time count in our time chart? No, it's only times that you spend actually with the families. Let's see, someone is asking, do we have to submit a plan to IBCLC after we finish our coursework or before? No, you do not. That's only for Pathway 3 folks and only for people who actually are utilizing Pathway 3 and actually need to get approval by a mentor. They will take your word for it when you actually apply for the exam. They simply ask for you to attest that you have the corresponding college courses, that you have the clinical hours, and that you have the didactic hours. And then if you're audited, then they're going to want to see proof. So then they're going to want to see transcripts and or certificates that you completed the didactic education, as well as your log for the clinical hours.
There's another question about, this one says, hi, I'm still not sure which pathway I should take. I'm a registered nurse, but I don't have any lactation related education or experience. And the reality is almost all nursing and medical, no matter what, even obstetricians don't really get that much lactation related education, i.e. I'm thankful for LER for being able to provide education for those working in those fields. And so Pathway 1 would still be applicable to you. You would just have to be in a space where you could get the clinical hours necessary, but you still have that foundational knowledge already. So you would not have to take those additional college science courses. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Excellent. Someone else is asking here, I'm a Breastfeeding USA counselor and I'm still earning 250 hours per year until 2022. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. I mentioned that it was hour by hour after January 1st of 2022 because it's so late in 2021 that I didn't want to confuse the issue. But yes, you specifically can continue to earn those 250 hours per year until December 31. Does LER provide assistance with partnering Pathway 3 students with chief IBCLC mentors outside of those areas listed on the website? Yes, we do. But I think it's important that you first do your homework and take a look in your community, in your region, to find out where you would like to work. And then LER can come in and discuss with them if they require an affiliated education organization. Then we can do that negotiation and provide the and sign the documents sometimes that are required in order to be considered coming from an accredited institution, so an accredited educational institution. And so LER does qualify for that. And so I would recommend, though, that if we don't have a current relationship with those facilities, please do reach out to them and see if you can get that set up.
Someone asks, is the WIC clinic, did you answer this already? Is the WIC clinic setting appropriate for clinical hours with an IBCLC on staff?
I did not, but I think I was going to wait for Julie to answer that question in writing.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
So, I mean, indeed, if the WIC clinic setting, so WIC is the Women, Infant, and Children clinic setting, so that is in the United States, and it's an organization that, a governmental organization that provides support and assistance for lactating, for specifically one of their mission is for breastfeeding families. And so it is an appropriate setting. If the IBCLC on staff, if you want to go through Pathway 3, get that program, get that Pathway 3 application done first. And then if you can utilize the IBCLC on staff, then that's great.
There's another one about working as a labor and delivery nurse. Am I able
to Can I interrupt? Sorry.
Oh, hey, Julie. Sure.
Yeah, I had answered the question up above about whether or not WIC was an appropriate setting. It's also an appropriate 1000 or Pathway 1 setting, even if an IBCLC isn't on staff, because it is a clinical setting. And so the IBLCE says that it has to be for pathway 1 that you either have to be achieving your hours in paid or volunteer work in a clinical setting or as part of one of the breastfeeding support organizations. WIC as a public health clinic is a clinical setting. All right, that's all.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Thank you. Someone else is asking, in pathway 1, they're spending a percentage of their NICU nursing hours towards lactation clinical hours, but now it's being counted hour by hour. So those are two different issues. So the hour by hour being counted hour by hour is for the people who are with an affiliated breastfeeding support organization. But as a clinician, you can use, for example, let's say as a NICU nurse, you spend 10% of your time working with breastfeeding or chest feeding families or the parents who are providing milk for their babies. It's that 10% that you would count. And so you can use the chart that's on the IBLC website and you can talk about the different percentages. But for those affiliated with the breastfeeding support organization, it is an hour by hour.
And there are lots of questions about the same context about being a labor and delivery nurse, being a NICU nurse. It's the same. As a former labor and delivery nurse or recovering labor and delivery nurse, however you want to call it, you can only use a certain percentage of your time. You're not at work 40 hours a week providing lactation support. And so that is one of the biggest challenges, figuring out how to count your hours. But if you go to the IBLCE website, you'll be able to figure that piece out.
There you go. Somebody asked, do you need the IBCLC to go into private practice or can you have another certification? I think that depends on your area. I would say that generally the IBCLC has the most autonomy of all the other, it's actually a credential where everything else out there are simply certifications. And so I think it's important that with most of the certifications, it's only supporting the normal course of breastfeeding. But the IBCLC, as Sekeita has mentioned, covers the complex. And so that's something which is really important, that's why the IBCLC is so important. Someone else is asking, is there a way to find employment so they can get their clinical hours and work at the same time? There are a few, but they're very few and far between. A lot of people have to juggle their family, have to juggle a paid job in order to attain their hours to become an IBCLC. And so again, it's important to do your market research and to find what is available in your area.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, for raising that up, market research, because there's some questions about who can help figure out certain pieces, and understanding that the lactation climate is different in different spaces. One area may be saturated with lactation support people and another area may not be so. So if you start by looking at your area, and for instance, you can even seek out WIC and see who does their lactation support and be able to find out or see if you can meet with that person and discuss what the climate is like and discuss all of these things. People in your area, as far as what the lactation landscape looks like, are more appropriate for asking those types of questions. Questions that we could really help with is pathway questions, the questions that Angela had, the presentation that Angela went over. And so I hope that helps, because some questions are really more appropriate for where you're going to be practicing and living at, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And there's a lot of people who have really specific questions in the chat. And I would just say, you can reach out to IBLCE, but many people find our customer support team phenomenal. And so, if I may say so myself, and so do reach out to us, because we support people all the time and we help to try to bring clarity to it. And so that's what we did a little bit today. And indeed, there may be special circumstances, but for the most part, the broad generalities that we've provided in today's webinar actually will provide you with those answers. And so even though we may not have said something specifically to you, take a look at the documents which are in the handout and see if, take a look at those websites and see if that answers your question. So it may not say exactly the answer that you want, but if you can infer, then chances are you can go ahead and do it. And if you have questions, please do reach out to our support team.
I want to follow up with this question. the question from about being in Dubai. And oops, I scrolled. I can't find it. Angela, do you see it?
Looking. There we go.
Questions.
They're a peds nurse based in Dubai. They have very strict rules on shadowing health professionals. I'm currently working through my 95 hours of the LER course. I'm concerned about getting the 1,000 clinical hours. I have been in contact with the midwife IBCLC here. However, I'm not going to be able to work alongside and observe. Well, as a peds nurse, you don't need to shadow. You can use your hours working as a peds nurse for Pathway 1. The only question is how much time do you have working with breastfeeding families or those providing human milk for their babies? And so that is going to be that piece of it.
The other, Angela, can I just chime in too about
Please.
that question? The reason why I brought that up is because, you know, I spoke about telehealth. And if you want to gather additional hours, that may be something to just start serving clients outside of the peds realm. Outside of, like, you have the opportunity to provide care and lactation support on your, especially having the 95-hour course. And with the Certified Breastfeeding Specialist certificate, there is a scope of practice that comes along with that you would be able to use to really start to get some of your hours. And I hope that, I just wanted to bring that up, Angela.
Really good
that
point.
Particular question.
I agree. Let's see, for Pathway 3, follow-up discussion with your mentor and charting time. Is that outside of your clinical hours? Yes, it is outside of your clinical hours. That does not count, but that's where you're going to find the most education, which is good. Someone is asking about legal issues when interning in a hospital or clinic. And so one thing that we usually do recommend for our interns, be they volunteer or paid, is to have additional insurance. And I'm going to assume that this person is residing in the United States. We're infamous for being litigious. And so I think that there is as some sort of a lactation support provider, you can get liability insurance, and that would be something to definitely consider. I think it protects a lot of people in that way. Okay, good. I think that is it for now. If you have further questions, please feel free. The legal person is actually in Canada. So there we go. Thank you. Someone else is asking for doulas. Do the hours spent assisting families with breastfeeding count? I would say take a look at the recognized healthcare professional list. I don't think that doulas are on the list, but I think they can count those hours. They're in a supervised setting. Yeah, Julie?
It depends very much. If it was mostly what the IBCLC says specifically is no. Unfortunately, doulas cannot. If
I thought so.
They were part of some other organization that was a mother support organization or a breastfeeding support organization, then they could. But they would need to be under that umbrella.
So in other words, now that LER is considered a breastfeeding support organization, if they were a certified breastfeeding specialist, they would count, right?
So Angela.
Yes.
There's
Sekeita.
a question that was flagged. It says,
I know, I just saw it.
Yeah, okay. So
we'll
go
finish
ahead
with this one. How about that?
Okay, go ahead.
Someone is asking, what are the biggest differences, challenges, and benefits of being one who works exclusively as an IBCLC and one who also has another license or credential? And so Sekeita and I can talk about this all day long. I would say some of the advantages of this is that I am able to, I have a really unique perspective, and I center the breastfeeding, chest feeding family, or that person providing human milk for their baby. They are centered in my mind, and they are centered in my practice. And the assessment that both Sekeita and I can do is a lactation specific assessment, which is different than an assessment you're going to get if you are a physician, if you are a midwife, if you are some other a nurse or some other sort of healthcare provider. And so indeed, I'm very singular in my view and in my approach. The downside of it, as I can well attest to, has to do sometimes with employment. And so again, it depends on the practice setting, it depends on your geopolitical region, but indeed, sometimes finding a job can be a challenge if you work exclusively as an IBCLC. And while in my area, someone who works exclusively as an IBCLC can get a job in a hospital, I do know many regions around the world where you cannot. And so, indeed, that's part of that market analysis and that market research that you need to do. What is typical in your area? If being hired at a hospital is your primary goal, then you need to make sure that you meet all of the requirements, and or somebody pretty high up in the C-suite or one of the chief executives within that facility that you can have a conversation with about why you should be able to. And indeed, I present this information all the time to folks. I've got my articles that I have, and I've got my documentation that I have, so that I can try to advocate for people working exclusively as an IBCLC and the value that we bring to the table. Sekeita, is there anything else?
No, Angela, no, I agree with everything Angela said, and I being a nurse and also an IBCLC, so I don't subscribe to the RN IBCLC or non-RN IBCLC. That's not a part of my vocabulary because there's some assumptions in hierarchy, and that's steeped in some other things. And so what I will say is that an IBCLC is a standalone credential. I stand by that. I support that. Whether or not you're RN has nothing to do with the skill level based on if you're an IBCLC. And I will say that time and time again. Even as I am a family nurse practitioner, board certified, I will say that because I've worked in the field, I've been in the field, I've worked along so many IBCLCs, and I will tell you that whether or not you are a physician, whether or not you are a dietitian, whether or not you are a registered nurse, that is not synonymous with skill. Okay, so I'll leave that there. Thanks, Angela.
Well, and that's the nice thing about it, is that because Sekeita does have, that additional education and training as a DNP, a Doctor of Nurse Practitioner, the DNP, because Sekeita has all of these additional skills, we collaborate very well together. And there are times when I know I need to send to another provider who has a different credential than I have. And therefore, I want to do my research in my community to find out who are these people that I can refer to, who are going to hear me, who are going to also center that and support that family in order to meet their goals. And so indeed, it takes all of us together in order to do this. And so I think that that's the reason why Sekeita and I are presenting today. It has to do with the fact that we come from these varied backgrounds, but yet we're supporting these families. So again, thank you very much for your time that you've spent with us today. The recording is going to be available on our website as well as on YouTube. So if there's something that you missed, please do check it out there, watch again, and feel free to email us if you do have any other questions. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.